Okay, in this part of the video, let's talk about disposal, how we are handling our waste, and then after how we can possibly solve the big issue regarding waste, mainly finding a way to reduce our production of waste. So we talk about the different type of trash, and for each type of trash, there tend to be different ways to dispose. But in general, if in the past, and if you didn't care about your trash, you would just dump everything out and just find a place where you can just throw your stuff without being seen, and that's it. That was kind of the practice in the past. As you can see, this illegal dump in New Jersey by 73, well beyond the street, well beyond the city. And if you kind of walk around, tour around in Merced, you might unfortunately see a few very small spots very similar to that stuff. This is of course totally illegal. Ideally, all the trash, when they've been sorted out, should be placed in a landfill. So that's an old practice that's still in some way currently found, but very limited, with very limited location, and again totally illegal. So what's legal are the landfills, in the idea that most of the time the city or the county will manage to find a site, and in this site to create a big hole, a big cavity in which they will place, usually on the bottom part, a liner that will in fact avoid any contamination from the trash into the direct soil below, and the potential underground water that can be found. After the liner is done, usually they're making a drain for any leaking liquid that may escape from the trash in itself. Everything will be collected in the drain that will after be collected in a reservoir, and ideally being treated to avoid any liquid pollution. And then you're filling up your landfill, and whenever it's ready, you just place a cap, with the idea that over the cap you might be able to grow something. That was the initial landfills. At this point, we have evolved a little bit more to create what we call sanitary landfill. Still using the same system, with the idea of more engineering on the creation of this landfill, with the idea to use engineering to avoid any possible contamination. So you'll have the liner at the very bottom part, and then you have a succession of different drainage, leachate drainage, to collect any possible liquids coming from the trash. And as you can see from the close-up, you have in fact gravels, compacted clay, different kind of grains from the soil that will in fact help filtering the liquid that goes through and catching possibly any toxic element or any dirty element. So ideally, before reaching the pipe, the liquid will have to go through some soil, then gravel. The clay is used as an impermeable level, so in fact, normally, if the clay is well compact, no liquid can go through it. That's kind of the idea. And then you accumulated waste over waste by adding compacted dirt in between each site of landfill, and whenever it's done, you are able in fact to possibly recover it by grass and let in fact the nature take over. Usually it's considered to be a long-term storage. From the landfill, recently, over the last decades, in fact, as we saw during the energy chapter, there is a possibility to create energy from the landfill, either as a separation of the material that will be thrown to the landfill and combusting, burning part of the material that can be burned. That's in fact what's using Sweden to burn most of its trash going through the landfill. So that will be this part where everything is selecting and going to burn. And when it's going to burn, it's providing electricity that can feed the grid. The other way is in fact on the top of from the landfill in itself, is being able to collect the gas that tend to be emitted by the landfill. There is in fact fermentation of the different trash. A lot of trash tend to be organic, as we saw, and so this fermentation releases a gas that tend to be in general methane, CH4. This methane can be collected, sent to a power plant that it will be using this gas as a combustible, burning, and from the combustion creating electricity, as we saw during the chapter of electricity, and this electricity can be sent to the grid. Okay, so the idea is just burning steam, spinning the turbine, working a generator, creating electricity. So that's kind of very briefly the way on land we tend to deal with waste. I already talked about nuclear waste, so we can go to the next point, which is what about the current ways to reduce our waste and the future possible approach. If we look at the current and future trend between 2010 and 2025, of course we expect a general increase of the waste being produced by our society, whatever level of income people are living in. And we can see the general, if we look in the general trend between 2010, what we can see is that in overall and in per capita, meaning per people, those who has the highest income are the one producing the most waste. We can make the same observation for 2025, except that the only difference is with the lower middle income category, we see that there is a bigger increase of waste generation, which might be coming from the country right now still being at the very low state of development and increasing their demographic transition, acceding to more consumption. So with this in consideration, how can we reduce our waste generation? And so the first approach is in fact what we call the 3 R's rule, which is in fact reduce, reuse, and recycle. The easiest way is in fact reducing our consumption to be reducing our waste, then reusing instead of throwing away, giving a second life to a product that we have, and recycling, which is in fact taking a product and making it as another one. So in the past, what the tendency has always been to be disposing of stuff, treating them at the second stage, recycling, and reduction. So at this point, what we want to do is reversing this pyramid where we start reducing, recycling, possibly treating, and then final step would be the landfill where nothing can be done. So we want to reverse this pyramid. That will be an easy way to go and the most practical, the most efficient way, the most effective way to go. So what is reduce? Reduce is just, again, as I mentioned just before, reducing the amount of production, of consumption that we're making, trying to have, as I illustrated with one product that can be making the equivalent of several ones. Other way of reducing the consumption of product is, for example, trying to push people, motivate people to, for example, to use less material, such as when you go to a coffee shop, well-known coffee shop, instead of ordering a coffee with the cup, etc., you come into the coffee shop and you have already your reusable cups. In general, those coffee shops tend to give you a small discount. So that's a way to motivate people to do it. Or if you go into stores nowadays, you will, coming with your bags, you will not be charged, and in fact you may have also some discounts. Regarding the same example, if you do not come with any bag, at this point you will have to be paying for possible disposable bag. That's another way. It's more like on a negative, a penalty side. A way that would be also nice would be, in fact, businesses, factories to redesign their product to use less packaging, or pushing people to buy more in bulk. Or, for example, when you do your groceries, instead of buying 2 or 3 bags of cereals, you're just buying the cereal that you need in bulk, and you're avoiding using a lot of material by this way, instead of carton box, plastic bags, etc. And finally, one way is also to possibly simplify the industrial practices by simplifying the product they use, and in fact reducing the possible hazardous way that they are creating during their production. So that's about reducing. What about reusing? Reusing is in fact giving a second life to your product. Like, for example, making a garage sale to sell your stuff that you are not using eBay for that point, or nowadays Facebook Marketplace. In general, trying to sell it for a lower price, but sometimes giving it for free, so someone can be using your product that you have stopped using it. This way, instead of throwing it, you give someone a product that this person wanted, and you're avoiding creating more waste. Also, I mean, there is an economy at this point working. Also, there is an economy living around those reusing practice, and so it also benefit the economy, and it may also benefit your wallet because you might be able to make some money out of this. And so you have a few examples of what you can be doing in terms of reusing. Example of that we might be able to talk in class later on. Then the third R stands for recycle. As we can see over the past, in the US, in the total waste being created, we've been in fact able to reduce more and more our disposed waste, which is in gray. What have we done from that? Well, we've been able to use part of the waste to create energy by combustion, as we saw with the landfill one, where we are sorting out what can be burned, and also the emission of methane. The other part, we've been improving little by little the composting. We'll talk about composting in just a bit. As you can see, this is not the major trend and the major way we've been able to reduce disposal of waste. The major advance has been in fact in recycling. We have in fact two types of recycling. What we call the closed loop recycling, where your product will be in fact treated and made as new as to make a similar product, such as, for example, a can of soda that will be sent to recycling will be clean, might be having another painting and everything, but then after, the idea is this can of soda will be used again as a can of soda, maybe a different one, but it will be reused again as recycled as a can of soda. The second type of recycling is what we call secondary recycling. And this is when you collect a lot of same material to in fact create a different product. And the example I have for you guys is in fact the collection of soda can that can be assembled together, and the amount of soda can is enough to create parts of a mower machine in this case. And that's a practice that's been used in this example in Japan. What are the pros and cons of recycling? Not everything is good about recycling. In general, this is costing less resources than the creation of a new product. It's using less water, less energy, less pollution, less CO2. The only issue is, well, it's still about education. People are not enough aware about the fact to recycle, and especially what and what not to recycle. The cons are in fact still using, unfortunately, resources such as water, energy, and pollution, and emission of and pollution that we cannot avoid. Also, the problem is it tends to be using, however, a little bit too much energy. We unfortunately have usually to make a lot of transportation included in this process, going from one factory to another one. There is an issue of downcycling, meaning that the product that you will make at a second time will have meaning that the quality of the product will not be as good as it was originally. You're losing little by little in terms of quality. Then after, also people tend to not look at this product with the same interest because it's recycled. Sometimes it looks not as nice, and there is this fight of recycled product not being sold. That's an issue at the end. If we look in terms of recycling, and that's the main issue about recycling, it's what can be recycled. In fact, we have 7 categories of recycling. So when you have a plastic in front of your material, just try to look upside down and look for this sign, which in fact stand for different type of material involved in your product. At this point, Merced, interestingly, has only 2 type of product that can be recycled, only category 1 and 2, where that depends after on where you're coming from. Different cities in California will have different type of material being recycled. Beside the 3R approach, which stands for reduce, reuse, and recycle, we can also deal with our organic waste by composting it. And that can be done either at your home with your own composting box, or more locally with your city. The idea is collecting for your cities all the green stuff that you are producing, coming usually from the backyard, which can be the grass, collecting all of them. They will be usually sent to a plant, that will be shredding it, and then after turning it into a field that might be used directly as fertilizers for this field. Also, they might just be accumulated together to later on produce, in fact, soil that can be used as soil for your backyard, usually with very good nutrients. You can do it also at home by collecting all the fruits and leftovers of fruits and vegetables that you have before cooking, shells of eggs also before cooking, everything that has to be fresh before cooking, and accumulate them together. That's usually what we call the brown waste. And you mix it up with the green one, which tend to be containing more carbon, so usually grass, leaves from trees, etc. And over time, just by mixing it, over a couple of months, you will start producing also this compost. This is a mix with organic matter working with some bacteria that tend to work with oxygen, and with insects and earthworms that will in fact decompose your material and turning it little by little into a nutrient that can be used over the soil and your plants. So that's one last way to deal with waste, but concerning organic matter. At the end, to conclude, we finally can see, instead of just reducing our amount of waste, is possibly looking at a zero waste approach, which is in fact close to what we do with composting. It's going into a circular, natural way. Up to now, we are again doing more a linear, like the linear economy, we are doing a linear consumption and production of waste. And so it's just a take, make, waste, the traditional one that we saw when we talk about the product. And the idea that could be done is in fact trying to increase the recycled part. So in fact you're starting creating a loop in which you're taking or you're borrowing in some way, you're using, and then after you return it to the initial step of production. And you kind of making your natural circle, avoiding to produce more waste. At the end, little waste will happen in which you will, ideally you will not have any more landfill. The only thing that can go out is in terms of composting, which again goes into a natural cycle of providing nutrients into your ground. In a more realistic way, we definitely want to avoid using landfill as much as possible, following in fact the example of Sweden, with the first thing to be using the 3R approach for reducing, reusing, and recycling, and composting, what I talked to you about in this point. Then also, we can use part of our waste to create fuel and chemical that can be in fact placed back into our chains of production. Finally, part of our waste can be used as combustible to provide the energy as electricity, as we talked about previously in energy and a little bit earlier in this chapter. And any leftovers, unfortunately, going into the landfill, but only a very little amount of waste will then go into the landfill. And again, Sweden at this point has been able to, by applying this part, to decrease the waste of landfill, the waste generated going to the landfill only to be 1%. So that's an example to follow. Again, as a comparison, the US is throwing about 70% of its waste to the landfill. So we definitely need to do something. Okay, so that's the end for the video for this chapter. I'll see you in class later on. See you later.